Have you ever felt like your truth makes people uncomfortable? Like the more honest you are, the more wrong you seem. I grew up that way, in a house where silence was a rule and obedience was disguised as respect. I learned that a well-behaved woman speaks softly, that a strong woman swallows what she feels, and that women who speak too much end up alone. I grew up believing that to be loved, I had to be quiet, but inside me, there was always a scream no one could hear, but that burned inside me. I learned to smile when I wanted to cry, to say I'm fine when my heart was begging for help. And the more I tried to fit in, the more I lost myself. Because living to please others is dying, little by little. The truth is, I was taught wrong. They taught me that silence avoids conflict, when in reality it only delays the pain. They taught me that being good means putting up with everything, when in fact, it only empties us. And one day, tired of being invisible, I decided to speak. That was the day the world started looking at me differently. People who used to praise me started to avoid me. And the hardest blow came from where I least expected it. My own daughter. She told me I embarrassed her for being too honest. I went silent for a few seconds, not because I agreed, but because I felt the weight of all the generations before me. Women who silenced themselves to keep the peace. Women who bent to fit into what the world called right. I looked at her and thought, how many of us still believe we have to hide what we feel just to be loved? How many of us still confuse submission with respect, silence with wisdom? I grew up hearing that a real woman is one who endures betrayal, humiliation, loneliness, all just to keep a home. But I ask you, what kind of home is that, if inside it you have to silence who you are? They say I'm tough. I say I learned from pain. They say I talk too much. I say I've spent too many years swallowing my words. They say my truth hurts. I say silence kills. And if being honest makes me seem hard, then so be it. I'd rather seem hard than live a lie. Some people think honesty is rudeness. I think rudeness is raising daughters to erase themselves. Rudeness is teaching that a wise woman is one who obeys, not one who thinks. Rudeness is telling a girl that silence is a virtue. That's how I grew up, believing that speaking my mind would push people away. But now I know, what drives people away is their fear of hearing the truth. And maybe that's why my daughter thinks I embarrass her, because my truth reflects everything people still can't face. But before I go on with this story, I want to ask you something. Write in the comments where you're watching me from. Tell me your city, your state, your country. I want to know how far this story reaches, because I know it's not just mine. It's the story of many women around this world, women who've been called too much, too emotional, too difficult, simply because they had the courage to be real. Write it down for me. Where are you right now? I want to see from how many corners this truth echoes, because I know someone out there is going to recognize themselves in every word. I've learned that silence has heirs. The pain we don't speak of becomes a burden our children carry. And that's what hurt me most when I heard my daughter say I embarrassed her. It hurt because I realized that what once wounded me still lives in her. And maybe what she calls shame is really fear. Fear of being judged, fear of being rejected, fear of being herself. I felt that fear too, until the day I realized that if the price of being loved was keeping quiet, then that love wasn't worth that much. The truth is, no one prepares us to be real women. And when I say real, I don't mean the body, I mean the soul. Women who feel, who speak, who think, who question. Women who get tired of looking down and finally decide to lift their eyes. It took me years to understand that I didn't need to apologize for being intense, that I didn't need to ask forgiveness for having an opinion, that I didn't need to shrink myself to fit in. And when I finally understood that, I realized a lot of people would be bothered by my freedom. But freedom always bothers those who still live in cages. When my daughter said those words to me, something inside me broke. But it wasn't love. It was the mirror that once reflected the girl I used to be, the one who tried so hard to please just to be accepted. I saw myself in her, and I swore that even if she doesn't understand it now, one day she'll realize that what I call truth is just love in its purest form. Because love also means saying what the other doesn't want to hear. Love also means being a mirror, even when the reflection hurts. And that's why I speak now. not to convince anyone, but to free what's been trapped inside for so long. My voice was silenced for years, but now it echoes. And if my story reaches you, then it's already worth it. Because maybe as I speak, you, on the other side, remember the times you stayed quiet to avoid trouble, the times you swallowed tears just to look strong, the times you accepted the unfair just to avoid being called difficult. I've lived all that. And maybe in your own way, you have too. So write it down in the comments. Where are you? Where are you listening from? And did any part of this story touch you? I want to know if there's someone out there who's also carrying an unspoken truth. This story isn't about shame. It's about freedom. It's about naming what they've always tried to hide. And I want you to stay with me until the end, because what's coming next will make you see yourself with different eyes. Don't go anywhere. When she said those words, time seemed to stop. Mom, you embarrass me. Just like that. Sharp, cold, without a second thought for what it would do to me. For a moment, the whole world went silent. And in that silence, I heard the echo of the girl I once was. The girl who was once ashamed of her own mother for being too loud, too emotional, too much. Funny how life moves in circles. We grow up trying to be different, and without realizing it, we repeat everything we swore we never would. I looked at my daughter and saw the same expression I once had, the look of someone who doesn't understand, but still judges. She looked at me like I was the reflection of everything she's trying to deny. And in that moment, I realized the mirror was cracked between us. One side showed the truth I carry, the other revealed the fear she still holds. It hurt, not out of pride, but because I saw history repeating itself. I saw the same shame I once felt for my own mother when she spoke too loudly in front of others, unafraid of who she was. I used to think she was rude. I used to think she should be quiet. But now I understand. She just didn't want to disappear. I took a deep breath, swallowed the lump in my throat, and told myself there was no use in shouting, because some truths can only be understood with time. I've been on the other side. I've been the daughter who thought she knew everything. I've looked at my mother with impatience, as if her experience was exaggeration. And now life, in all its irony, has placed me in her shoes. You know what's cruel? Realizing that the shame my daughter feels for me is the same shame I once felt for my mother. The shame of seeing a woman too free to be accepted. And I know that freedom scares those who still live for other people's approval. She told me, "You could be more reserved, calmer, think before you speak." And I thought about how many times I'd heard that before, and how many times I'd stayed quiet just to be what others expected. How many times I'd swallowed words that choked me. How many times I smiled when my soul was screaming. All just to avoid being called rude. All just to be loved. But the truth is, there's no real love where there's no room to be who we are. And if the price of acceptance is my silence, then I'd rather be rejected with truth than loved with a lie. I looked at my daughter and realized what she calls shame is really fear. Fear of becoming like me. Fear of inheriting the same courage I had to find. Fear that her own honesty might also be misunderstood. I saw myself in her. I saw the same girl I once was, trying to be perfect to be approved, trying to speak prettily to be accepted, trying to hide her strength so she wouldn't seem aggressive. I wanted to hold her, but I couldn't. Pride builds walls, and her silence was a wall between us, high, cold, and painful. Sometimes the deepest pain doesn't come from what's said, but from what hangs in the air, unspoken. That day, she didn't yell. She just turned her face and left, and I stood there, frozen, my heart heavy, memories spinning in my mind. I remembered my own mother, the day I said something similar, not realizing how much it hurt. Today, I've paid that same price. Life has a way of giving back what we once threw into the world without thinking. I wanted to run after her, but my body wouldn't move. And in that moment, I understood that time also teaches through silence. How often do we judge without knowing the whole story? How often do we call something shameful when it's really strength? I don't want my daughter to inherit this legacy of fear. I don't want her to grow up thinking love means staying quiet, that respect means hiding, that truth should be swallowed. I want her to understand that truth sets you free, even when it hurts. And if you've ever lived through something like this, if you've had a conversation that left you in pieces, Write it down in the comments. I understand. I want to see who else carries this wound, because I know I'm not the only one. That day, when the door closed, I sat on the couch and stared at the wall, as if it could answer for me. It felt like every memory from my childhood came back to visit. I heard my mother's voice saying, "One day you'll understand me." And she was right. I did. Too late, but I did. Shame is a legacy disguised as good manners. We learn to shrink ourselves so we won't bother anyone, and we call that respect. We learn to stay silent to avoid conflict, and we call that wisdom. We learn to smile at those who hurt us, and we call that love. And without realizing it, we teach our daughters to do the same. I don't want to pass down that curse of silence anymore. I want to shatter the mirror, even if the shards cut my hands, because it's only when we bleed from our own truth that we understand the value of being whole. And in that heavy silence of the house, I realized my daughter wasn't my enemy. She was the reflection of the girl I once was, a girl trying to survive in a world that punishes honest women. And maybe that's why she judged me, because deep down, she's afraid of being like me. But being like me isn't an insult. It's destiny. It's strength. It's learning. It's the continuation of a lineage of women who survived guilt and fear and still found their voices. I wanted to tell her, my daughter, what you call shame is the same fire that will one day set you free. But I stayed quiet, not out of fear, but because I knew everyone has their own time to understand. Truth can't be forced. It ripens on its own. When the pain grew too heavy, I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. Mother's memory came to me like a whisper, the same pain, the same misunderstood love. And that's when I realized what one generation doesn't say, the next one repeats. I stood up and walked slowly through the house. Everything felt full of memories. The table where she did her homework, the couch where she'd fall asleep watching cartoons, the hallway once filled with laughter. Now there was only an echo, and in that echo, I heard my own voice, the voice of a woman who learned that being understood isn't what matters most. What matters is being true. And maybe one day she'll understand that. Maybe one day she'll look at me and see not an embarrassment, but a mirror. The same mirror that's cracked now, but one that can still be rebuilt. If you've ever felt that weight between mother and daughter, write in the comments, the mirror can still be fixed. I want to see who still believes that love is stronger than pride. That night felt endless. I lay awake, thinking about the words she said, the ones I didn't, and the ones that got stuck in my throat. The pain of being misunderstood is an old one, but a mother's love is stubborn. It holds on, it waits, and it forgives, even when no one asks it to. And as I thought, I realized my story isn't about resentment. It's about repetition. The same wound my mother carried now lives in me and is trying to reach my daughter. I know that if I don't break the cycle now, it will continue. And that's why I speak, even when no one wants to listen, even when they say I'm too much. Because truth is the only legacy I want to leave behind. And if she ever comes back, I want her to find me with the same courage I once needed to become who I am. I want her to look at me and see not a woman who embarrassed her, but a woman who freed her. But that hasn't happened yet. Until then, I'll keep speaking. I'll keep remembering. I'll keep living. Because silence has never saved me. She wanted me to stay quiet. She wanted me to take a deep breath, count to 10, and pretend nothing happened. She said sometimes silence prevents trouble, that not everything needs to be said, that words can hurt. And I just looked at her, wondering when women were taught that silence is a virtue. Because to me, staying silent is dying twice, first inside, then on the outside. I stayed silent for years, and the result was a soul full of things stuck in its throat. As she spoke, I felt a mix of anger and compassion. Anger because I saw my daughter repeating the same speech I heard my entire life. Compassion because I knew she didn't mean harm. She was just afraid of being rejected, of being judged, of being called too much. That fear is old. It's inherited. It comes from a time when a woman who spoke her mind was called hysterical, when honesty was mistaken for rebellion, and rebellion was punished. I took a deep breath and said, "My daughter, truth might hurt, but silence rots." She didn't answer. She pretended not to hear and turned her face away. I knew that any extra word would turn into a fight, and I didn't want to fight. I just wanted her to understand. But sometimes, understanding only comes with time. The house was quiet, but inside me, the noise was deafening. It was the sound of all the times I stayed silent not to upset anyone, of all the nights I swallowed my tears so I wouldn't seem weak, of all the conversations I should have had but didn't. And now, there she was, repeating the same mistake. The cycle was closing right in front of me. I remembered being a little girl, hearing people say that a well-mannered woman speaks softly, that a wise woman chooses her words, that a respectable woman doesn't argue. And I tried to be all those things. But what did I gain? People who interrupted me, belittled me, made me believe my voice was inconvenient. Until one day I realized there's no wisdom in staying quiet in the face of injustice. There's only fear, and I refused to live in fear anymore. I looked at my daughter and saw in her the same struggle, the desire to be true, suffocated by the fear of being judged. I saw a girl trying to become what everyone expects her to be, and that's when I understood that our conflict wasn't about words, it was about freedom. She wanted me to be the kind of woman the world applauds, but I became the kind of woman the world fears, and it's that very fear that exposes the truths no one wants to face. I told her I wasn't going to apologize for being authentic, that I would no longer say sorry for speaking my mind. She got upset, said I make everything dramatic, that I exaggerate, that I always need to be the center of attention. And I laughed, not out of mockery, but exhaustion, because that's how the world reacts when a woman refuses to bow her head. They call courage drama. She accused me of not knowing how to control myself, and I wanted to tell her that too much control makes you sick, that self-restraint, when taken too far, becomes a prison. But I stayed quiet, not out of fear, but because I realized the conversation was no longer about the two of us. It was about everything we were taught to be, and everything we still need to unlearn. How many times in my life have I been told to be careful with my words, to not ruin the mood, to keep quiet about what was clearly in front of me? And every time I didn't speak, it ate away at me. The words I swallowed turned to weight, and the body always pays for what the soul can't release. The truth might be hard, but it's light. Silence feels light, but it's heavy. I know she doesn't understand that yet. She thinks my honesty is aggression, my bluntness is a lack of tact, my clarity is unnecessary. But one day, she'll see that what the world calls rudeness is often just truth spoken without disguise. And if being honest is a sin, then may God forgive me. As she spoke, I watched her, the way she held her phone, the way she looked away, the way she took deep breaths to hold back irritation. Everything about her reminded me of myself, and it hurt, because it's hard to see in someone else the same wounds you still carry inside. I wanted to protect her from the weight of being a woman in a world that prefers us quiet, but I realized she has to feel it, stumble, fall, and rise again, just like I did. She said, "Not everything needs to be said." I answered, "But what's not said turns into resentment." She gave me that impatient look, and in her eyes, I saw the same desperation I once had, the desperation of someone who wants peace but still confuses peace with silence. I thought about all the women in my family, my mother, who stayed silent out of fear, my grandmother, who died choking on words she never said, my great-grandmother, who was called insolent just for having an opinion, and I realized that each of them lived a piece of my silence. I am the result of all of them, but I am also the break in that chain. I don't want to live afraid of being misunderstood anymore. If my daughter needs an example, let it be me. Let her see me speak, make mistakes, fall, and get back up. Let her see me being human. Let her understand that authenticity isn't rebellion, it's survival. And I want everyone listening to understand this too. Being truthful isn't rudeness, it's self-respect. Saying what you think isn't offensive, it's freedom. Silencing yourself to please others is betrayal. If you understand what I mean, write in the comments. Speaking is also love. Her words were still echoing when night fell. I sat alone in the kitchen, staring into the emptiness, remembering all the times I stayed silent so no one would call me bitter. Today, I see that people confuse bitterness with truth. They mistake firmness for coldness. They label as rude every woman who refuses to settle for less than she deserves. I wish she could understand that good manners aren't blind obedience, that respect isn't self-erasure, that kindness isn't submission. The world taught us everything backward, and now it's our job to rewrite what it means to be a woman. My daughter says she hates when I speak my mind in front of others, says it feels like I'm trying to expose everyone, but she doesn't realize that silence also exposes you to pain, to lies, to injustice. Silence is a reversed mirror. Whatever you try to hide in it always comes back, stronger. I feel sorry for the women who still believe that speaking up is disrespectful. Respect isn't the absence of a voice, it's the presence of truth. And what I want to leave her is exactly that, the courage to speak, even when her voice shakes. When she went upstairs, the sound of the door closing felt like a period at the end of a sentence. But I knew it wasn't the end, just another chapter in our story. I sat there, alone, feeling both the weight and the relief of not having stayed quiet. Because every time we choose truth, we lose something, but we gain peace. Peace. That's what I felt at that moment. The house was dark, the silence thick, but inside me there was a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The clarity of someone who knows they did what needed to be done. I didn't know when she'd talk to me again, but I knew that when she did, she would find a whole woman, not a shadow. Speaking the truth takes courage, and courage doesn't always bring applause. Sometimes it brings solitude, but it's a dignified solitude, one that heals. Lies may comfort, but they imprison. Truth hurts, but it frees. And if I have to choose, I'll always choose freedom, even when it hurts. It was late when I realized I was still awake, thinking about everything we'd said. I poured a glass of water, sat in the armchair, and felt a light weight in my chest, the weight of a clear conscience. I could have stayed quiet to avoid discomfort, but that would have been betrayal, and I've already spent too long being my own enemy. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and speaking your truth, write in the comments, I choose truth. I want to see how many women still have the courage to choose themselves, even when the world demands silence. Tomorrow, maybe nothing will change. Maybe she'll still look at me from a distance. Maybe she'll still think I talk too much. But I've learned that real love isn't measured by how much we please each other. It's measured by how much we're willing to grow together, even among the shattered pieces of the mirror that truth breaks. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the tongue of truth may be sharp, but it's sacred. It's through it that stories are told, wounds heal, and women find their way back to existence. And I will never cut it again, because my voice, now, is my freedom. My mother used to call me a disgrace just because I said what I saw. I was little, but I already had this habit of noticing too much, of seeing what adults pretended not to. One day, I remember, it like it was yesterday. She was sitting in the kitchen with a guest. I walked in and said something I shouldn't have. A simple truth, but it sounded like defiance. Her look pierced through me. In that moment, I learned what the weight of silence was. I froze, heart pounding, trying to understand what I'd done wrong. The guest gave an awkward laugh, my mother forced a smile, and I, for the first time, swallowed a truth. That was the first of many. My childhood was a training in silence. Every time I said something too honest, I was told I was disrespectful, unmannered, a loose tongue, words that stick to you like shame. And that's how I learned to measure what could and couldn't be said. I grew up believing that truth needed permission to exist. I remember the afternoons I'd hide in the backyard, sitting by the guava tree, just to be able to talk to myself. There, I said everything I'd been holding in. I told the wind what I couldn't tell anyone else. The wind was the only one who listened without judgment. And as the leaves moved, I felt my voice was still alive, even if the world kept trying to silence it. My mother used to say that a respectable woman knows when to stay quiet, that a girl's mouth is made for smiling, not for giving opinions. And I believed her. After all, every time I spoke, people seemed uncomfortable. It was like I had a gift for saying the very things no one wanted to hear. And the more they tried to correct me, the more I felt that the problem wasn't me. It was the discomfort my truth caused. I remember the smell of the house, the sound of the radio, the clatter of pots and pans. Everything was routine, everything was rule. And inside that routine, my voice had no place. Silence was the currency. In exchange for a good girl, I stayed quiet. In exchange for a "you make me proud," I pretended not to see. But inside, something was breaking. My mother used to say I talked too much, that one day the world would teach me to be more discreet. What I didn't know was that this world she spoke of was really fear, the fear that lived inside her, the same fear she inherited from her mother and her mother before her, an invisible chain binding generations of women to the same fate, living to please and dying with words stuck in their throats. I grew up watching strong women be called bitter, smart women labeled insolent, honest women pushed aside. The ones who spoke their minds were always the ones sitting alone at family gatherings, off in a corner, quiet, as if they carried guilt for simply existing too much. I promised myself I wouldn't be like that, but fate has a cruel way of making us repeat the very things we swore we'd never do. When my daughter called me an embarrassment, I felt what my mother must have felt. It was like hearing the same story again, just with a new face. Deep down, I realized that what she saw in me was the same thing I saw in my mother, a woman who didn't know how to stay silent, and because of that, was misunderstood. Truth unsettles, but it also illuminates. As a child, every time I said something too honest, my mother punished me with a look. She didn't need to raise her hand. Her eyes did all the work. It was the kind of look that said, "Be careful what you say." That look taught me to measure my words. I learned to be cautious, but I never stopped seeing what needed to be said. The difference was, I learned to keep it to myself, but holding too much inside makes you sick too. Sometimes I think my mother also wanted to speak, but couldn't. She carried the weight of her own unsaid truths. I used to see her cry alone, in the dark, thinking no one noticed, but I did. And that's when I learned that silence isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of pain. I loved her, even when I didn't understand her rules, and now I see that her way of silencing me was the only way she knew how to protect me. She thought she was teaching me caution, but she was really teaching me fear. And fear, that's a hard inheritance to break. I still remember a phrase she always said, "If you say whatever you want, you'll hear what you don't want." That stayed with me for years, until one day I realized that those who don't say what they feel end up hearing what they don't deserve. And that was the day I decided my voice would never be imprisoned again. But it's easy to talk about now, with time and scars. Back then, all I wanted was to be loved, and the price of love was silence. That's why I smiled. That's why I pretended to agree. That's why I swallowed the words that burned in my throat. The girl I once was learned to stay quiet to survive. The woman I am today speaks to heal. If you were also raised to swallow what you feel, write in the comments. I also learned to stay quiet. I want to see how many of us carry the same wound. How many are still trying to relearn how to speak without fear. I remember one night, I must have been around 10. My mother was crying in the kitchen, and I asked her why. She said it was nothing, but her nothing smelled like old pain. I pressed her, and she said, "Some things we just don't talk about, honey. We swallow them." That sentence branded itself into me, and for years, that's exactly what I did. I swallowed. Now I understand that swallowing was her way of surviving in a time when women who spoke up were punished. She lived what I now face, and even though we've come a long way, the world still demands the same thing from us, gentleness disguised as goodness. The saddest part is realizing that fear changes its outfit, but not its purpose. Back then, it was fear of the husband, the neighbor, the priest. Today, it's fear of criticism, of rejection, of judgment. The prison just changed colors, and the key is still in our hands. We just hesitate to use it. I remember in school, whenever I answered something firmly, the teacher gave me a look, told me I needed to be more polite, and I kept wondering why the boys could speak loudly and I couldn't. Why when I said the same thing, it suddenly became wrong. I learned early that the world had different rules for us, rules that made no sense, and no one dared to question them. And now, as an adult, I realize that echo still lives inside me. The little girl who learned to stay silent still whispers sometimes, begging me to stop, afraid of being punished again. But I hold her close and say, "It's different now. Now we can speak." When my daughter called me an embarrassment, The echo of my mother's voice cut through time and reached me. It was as if all three of us were there, tangled in the same knot. 3 generations of women trying to be heard and being called dramatic for it. I want to break that cycle. I want the next generation to know that having a voice isn't a sin, that honesty isn't an offense, that speaking truth is the purest act of love there is. But I know that can't be taught with words. It has to be shown by example. And maybe that's why I have to keep talking, even when it hurts. Because every time a woman speaks, a girl learns that she can. Every time a mother stands her ground, a daughter learns she doesn't have to apologize for feeling. So if this story stirs something inside you, write in the comments. I'm breaking the silence. I want to see who's ready to turn pain into freedom. I still hear my mother's voice in the back of my mind, sometimes harsh, sometimes tired, sometimes sad. But now I realize that behind the sternness was love, a confused love, shaped by fear. And it's that fear I refuse to carry any longer. The words she once forbade me to say are now the ones that sustain me. What once was shame is now strength. What once was silence is now an inheritance of courage. Because the little girl who learned to stay quiet grew up to teach the world how to listen. The echo of childhood still follows me. It reminds me where I came from and why I can't give up. Because every time my voice trembles, it's her, the silent girl, whispering that it was worth surviving. I discovered that what we inherit isn't just blood, it's fear too. It passes from mother to daughter like a cursed secret disguised as care. Fear has a smell, a color, a voice. It grows with us, dressed as prudence, good manners, respect. But underneath, it's always the same. The fear of being judged, of being abandoned, of being who we are. And it took me a lifetime to realize I'd been feeding that fear in my own home, in the words I chose, in the pauses I made, in the truths I swallowed. Fear taught me to speak slowly, to watch my tone, to avoid conflict. It made me apologize even when I was right, and it made my daughter believe that was the right way to live. I inherited fear from my mother, and without realizing it, I started passing it on. And it was only when I saw my daughter repeating my hesitations that I understood the weight of the chain that bound us. Fear is hereditary, but courage can be too. The difference is, courage must be chosen. It doesn't just appear, it's built. And to build it, you have to break away from what feels normal. You have to unlearn the art of staying silent. I grew up hearing that a wise woman doesn't raise her voice, that a woman of faith accepts her fate, that a strong woman endures. Enduring became the verb that defined entire generations. But I'm tired of enduring. I'm tired of confusing patience with resignation, tired of calling fear prudence, tired of teaching silence as a virtue. Because what we call respectful quiet is, in truth, fear dressed up as obedience. And that's what I saw in my daughter's eyes, the same fear I was taught to carry. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed and began to cry. It wasn't anger, it was an ancient kind of crying, the kind that comes from deep inside, carrying the weight of many women at once. It was as if my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, all of them, were crying with me. Each tear carried a memory, an unspoken word, a restrained gesture. I cried for myself, for them, and for all the women still swallowing their feelings to keep up the illusion of peace. As the tears fell, I understood that fear is the quietest legacy of all. It hides inside the advice given by those who love us. Don't talk back. Let it go. Don't say that. Why start trouble? And we obey, thinking we're being wise, when in reality, we're being trained to disappear. My daughter learned the same thing, and I saw how it was trapping her. The fear of disappointing me, of saying the wrong thing, of being judged. Everything I tried to protect her from, she inherited anyway. Not through my words, but through my example. Because fear isn't taught in lessons, it's taught in gestures. I thought I was being strong by swallowing my feelings, but all I was doing was repeating the cycle. I closed my eyes and saw my mother's image. She was sitting on the porch, sewing in. Silence, tired eyes, firm lips, and that expression of someone carrying the world inside her without ever saying a word. How many times did I watch her swallow pride, tears, anger? How many times did I hear her silence echo through the house? That shaped me. That taught me that a good woman is a restrained woman. And now I understand that was fear. Fear is cunning. It disguises itself as virtue. It makes us believe being discreet is noble when it's submission. It makes us think enduring. Everything is strength when it's actually a wound. And the worst part is when it becomes comfortable, when silence becomes habit, when swallowing pain turns into routine. We think it's a choice, but it's really a prison. That night, I swore I wouldn't pass that on. My daughter would not inherit fear as her legacy. I decided that from now on, what runs in our blood will no longer be fear. It will be courage, even if it hurts, even if it costs me my peace for a while. I want her to learn to speak, to stand her ground, to question. I want her to know that real love doesn't require silence. When the sun rose, I felt something inside me shift. It wasn't lightness, it was clarity, and clarity hurts. It forces you to see what you've spent a lifetime trying to ignore. I saw the woman fear had built in me, the woman who lowered her gaze not to be misunderstood, the woman who set her heart aside not to seem weak. And I realized that woman no longer exists. But fear still tries to whisper. It tries to convince me that change is dangerous, that confrontation is risky, that honesty pushes people away. But now I know, anyone who walks away from my truth was never really close to me. And that's when I began to understand the true value of authenticity. Authenticity isn't an easy choice. It's a daily battle against centuries of conditioning. As I thought, I remembered my grandmother. She used to say that some pain doesn't disappear. It just changes address. And I understood. That fear is exactly that. A wandering pain, changing bodies, but staying in the family, passing through generations like a ghost. And every woman born has to decide, will she be its home or its exorcism? I chose to be the exorcism. And if you want to break free from the fear you were taught to carry, write in the comments, I don't inherit fear anymore. I want to see who's ready to cleanse the soul, to cut the thread that's been binding us for so long. I spent my life believing it was wise not to say everything, that it was mature to wait for the right time to speak. But the right time never comes, because fear always finds an excuse to delay. It always says, not now. And when the moment passes, regret stays. How many times did I stop myself from standing up for what was right, just to avoid conflict? How many times did I swallow my truth to keep someone close? Now I see that in trying to save relationships, I lost pieces of myself. Fear also teaches us to love the wrong way. It makes us believe that love means enduring everything in silence. But real love doesn't suffocate. It sets free. My mother loved with fear. I loved with guilt. I want my daughter to love with truth. That day, as the sunlight came through the window, I whispered to myself, I don't want this fear anymore. The words came out softly, but firm. It felt like breaking a spell. My body trembled, as if every cell had heard me. And in that moment, I realized that breaking free from fear is a spiritual act. It's when the soul finally breathes after years of hiding. But it's not easy. Breaking fear requires courage just to exist. It's waking up every day and choosing your voice, even when it unsettles people. It's being loyal to yourself, even when the world calls you stubborn. It's walking alone if you must, but walking whole. I thought of my daughter and imagined what she would say if she saw me there, crying and smiling at the same time. Maybe she'd say I was overreacting. Maybe she'd call it drama. But one day she'll understand. One day she'll look at her own life and see how much of me lives in her. She'll see that fear isn't destiny. It's a choice. Fear has invisible hands that mold us. It decides the tone of our voices, the size of our dreams, the steadiness of our gaze. But I don't want it to decide for me anymore. I want my words to carry the weight of truth, even if they tremble. I want my choices to be guided by faith, not guilt. And in that moment, still sitting, on the bed with tears on my face, I realized that fear is the greatest thief of time. It steals our years, makes us live halfway, smile without joy, exist without presence. I've lost so much time trying to be who others expected me to be. Now I want to reclaim the time fear stole from me. I didn't yet know how to do it, only that I had to start. And the first step was simple: to speak. Not the words the world wanted to hear, but the ones trapped inside me. Words of healing, of freedom, of forgiveness. Because fear can't survive the truth. When we face it head on, it shrinks. I looked in the mirror and saw my mother's face reflected in mine. She was still there, even after all these years, and I realized she too had been a victim of fear. She didn't know what she was doing. She was only repeating what she had learned. I don't blame her, but I won't continue it either. Fear is a knot that unravels with courage, and courage begins the moment we stop pretending everything is fine. And that day, I stopped. I wasn't fine, but I was awake, and that was already the beginning of my freedom. She stopped calling me. Silence is the favorite punishment of those who don't want to listen. At first, I thought it was just space, that soon she'd reach out, maybe when the pride faded. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The phone stayed silent, and her silence began to fill the house with an absence that couldn't be explained. It wasn't just her voice that was missing. It was her presence, her gestures, her rhythm. The house became too big, too cold, too quiet. It's strange how someone's silence can make more noise than any scream ever could. I tried to respect her time, but inside me, something broke a little more each day. That's what truth does. It sets you free, but it also separates. It brings light, but it blinds those not ready to see. I knew my words could push her away, but I never imagined the price would be silence. I kept asking myself, if I'd done the right thing, if I should have said it differently, if I should have just stayed quiet one more time. But staying quiet would have been dying again, and I refused to die just to fit into someone else's life, not even my daughter's. Sometimes the hardest kind of love is the one that has to exist from a distance. I wanted to hold her, but I knew forced touch turns into wounds. So, I let time do its work. But time isn't in a hurry, and missing someone makes its passing even slower. Every morning without a message was a reminder of the distance. Every night without a good night was an open wound. And I learned the hardest way that truth, once spoken, often demands silence as its payment. I'd see other mothers talking about their daughters, their grandchildren, their Sunday visits, and I'd just smile. Inside, the longing was eating me alive. It's cruel to miss someone who's still alive but distant by choice. And still, I understand. She needs silence to process what I said. She needs distance so she doesn't have to confront it. Truth does that. It reflects what others try to hide. Sometimes I think her silence is a continuation of the same fear I once fed. I taught my daughter to be strong, but not to be vulnerable. I taught her to endure, but not to listen. And now, she's repeating the same gesture I once used with my own mother. Distance disguised as maturity. The cycle repeating again, and me here, trying to break it without breaking myself. Days drag by when longing has nowhere to go. I still cook her favorite meals, keep her brand of coffee in the cupboard, and sometimes talk out loud as if she could hear me. A mother's love has this stubborn habit. It keeps showing up, even when it hurts. It doesn't know how to quit. It waits, even when tired. At night, when the phone lights up, my heart races, thinking it's her. But it rarely is. Just distant messages, empty notifications. What I want is simple, to hear her voice saying, "Hey, Mom." So small, so ordinary, and yet so necessary. I catch myself replaying memories, trying to find the exact moment we lost each other. Maybe it was that conversation. Maybe it was long before, in the words I didn't say, the times I was too harsh, or when I tried to teach more than I listened. Love makes mistakes, even with the best intentions. Sometimes we wound while trying to protect. Now the house seems to hold echoes. I hear her footsteps down the hallway, her laughter still clinging to the walls, her scent lingering in the sheets. Her absence isn't empty. It's full of memories, and every memory reminds me of my choice, to speak instead of staying silent. And even though it hurts, I know I did the right thing. Because love built on lies isn't love, it's dependence. But even knowing that, the longing doesn't let up. I try to distract myself. I read, I pray, I walk. But every nightfall brings her absence back to me, and I let it. Because denying pain only gives it power. I've learned that the only way to move forward is to feel. Her silence has taught me things words never could. It's shown me how much it still hurts to be truthful in a world that worships appearances. It's shown me that courage often costs loneliness, and that even alone, I can still be at peace. Because true peace doesn't depend on someone else's presence. It depends on the integrity of your own soul. I don't know how long this silence will last, but I know it has a purpose. It's in silence that truth matures, that anger turns into reflection, that pride dissolves, that love finds new ways to speak. I hope she's learning what I learned. Silence also speaks. Sometimes it screams, but some days the longing is stronger than my faith. Days when I look at my phone and almost call, almost text, almost apologize. But then I remember, apologizing for the truth is the same as denying who I am. And I can't do that anymore. I've spent a lifetime shrinking to fit in. Now I just want to exist, fully, even if it means being alone. I think of my mother, and I understand what she felt when I pulled away. The same emptiness, the same waiting, the same fear of being forgotten. And I wonder, how many women live this? How many mothers endure the punishment of silence, that emotional exile imposed by their own children? It's a pain that can't be told, only carried. And if you've ever felt it, write in the comments. I know what silence is. I want to see who else has learned the price of speaking the truth. I don't blame my daughter. Everyone faces truth in their own way. Some confront it, others run. And sometimes running is the only way the heart knows how to not completely break. I just hope that when she looks back, she'll see that what I said wasn't meant to hurt. It was meant to free. Sometimes I think about writing her a letter, saying everything that no longer fits in a conversation, telling her I miss her, that I still make coffee for two, that her towel is still folded in the same spot, telling her that love hasn't faded. It's just quieter now, but I don't write it, because even the letter would be a way of interrupting her process, and I have to trust that the love I planted will bloom when it's time. The days go on, and her silence doesn't scare me the way it used to. At first, it was pain. Now, it's space. Space that forces me to look within, to hear my own voice without interference. I've learned that someone else's silence can also be a mirror, and what I see, reflected, is a woman learning to be whole, even in absence. When I think of her now, it's no longer with bitterness, but with longing and hope. Because every separation born from truth has something sacred in it. It's the space the soul needs to heal. And maybe that's what we're doing, healing, each in our own silence. Truth is a dividing line. Once it arrives, nothing goes back to how it was. Some relationships grow stronger, others fall apart, but all of them change. And I've learned to accept that change without fear. Because sometimes losing contact is the price of keeping your conscience clear. I still find myself imagining the reunion. What will it feel like to hear her voice again? Will she still call me Mom with the same tenderness? Will she look at me with the same love? I don't know. But when that day comes, I don't want any tears held back or words left unsaid. I just want her to find me at peace. Until then, I keep talking to God, asking Him to touch her heart, to show her that truth was never rejection. Truth is just a different way of loving. Because love is also teaching, even when the other person doesn't want to learn. Sometimes I look up at the sky and whisper, "Take care of her for me." And I feel a gentle breeze, as if it's an answer. The same wind I used to feel as a child, talking to myself in the backyard. The same wind that carried my words away and brought me comfort. It's the same one that soothes me now. And in that comfort, I realize something essential. I don't need to be heard to exist. I just need to keep being who I am, and that no one can take from me. If this part of the story touches something in you, write in the comments. I learn from silence. I want to see who understands that silence, too, is part of healing, that sometimes it's not punishment, but pause, because truth hurts, but lies make us sick. And between pain and sickness, I'll always choose the pain that heals. Telling the truth was never about hurting. It's about setting yourself free, and it took losing a lot to understand that. I lost friends, I lost love, I lost the false peace that comes from pretending not to see. But I gained something no one can ever take from me, the peace of sleeping with a clean conscience. Truth is hard, but it heals, and healing sometimes comes disguised as pain. I learned that those who live behind appearances will never understand the value of a sincere word, Because sincerity makes people uncomfortable, but it also wakes them up. It's a mirror that forces us to face ourselves, and not everyone is ready to look without emotional makeup. I grew up surrounded by unspoken truths. I saw people getting sick from swallowing their feelings. I saw families fall apart because no one had the courage to speak. People fear truth because it demands change, and change hurts. It hurts to admit we were wrong. It hurts to face that we've been pretending. It hurts to realize that even love can suffocate. But what hurts even more is living inside a lie. I was always told that truth should be spoken with care, but too much care turns into censorship, and I don't want to censor what's real anymore. For me, telling the truth is an act of love. Love for myself, for those who listen, and even for those who can't yet understand. Because when I speak, it's not to win an argument. It's to free myself from the prison that silence built. Life showed me that truth and love walk hand in hand, though many still believe you need to lie to protect love. Why hurt them, they say. But what hurts isn't the truth. It's the lie that lingers. To love is to have the courage to say what someone needs to hear, even when it might sting. Real love never fears transparency. I used to blame myself for being too direct, for not sugarcoating, for speaking up when silence would have been easier. And maybe that's why some people walked away. But over time, I realized that distance is truth's natural filter. Those who can't handle hearing it are rarely strong enough to stay. Truth scares those who hide behind masks, but it attracts those searching for light. Some confuse firmness with coldness, honesty with lack of empathy. But real love teaches with strength and corrects with compassion. Loving isn't staying quiet to keep the peace. It's speaking, even when fear says to hush. Sometimes the word that cuts is the same one that saves. I remember the times I had to hear truths that shattered me, but those were the truths that helped me stand back up. They tore down who I thought I was and made room for who I needed to become. That's how I learned that pain also teaches. And today, when I speak, I don't speak to wound. I speak to teach. Love that walks beside truth is the bravest love there is, because it doesn't care about applause. It cares about the soul. It understands that today's wound can become tomorrow's reminder of strength. Silence, on the other hand, is deceitful. It looks peaceful, but hides everything we try to bury. I've lived through the heavy silence of fear, the strategic silence to avoid conflict, and the hollow silence of losing hope. None of them brought me peace. Peace only came when I chose honesty, even if it meant facing judgment. I often say that truth is like the sun. You can try to hide it for a while, but it always finds a way back. And when it shines, it lights up everything, the beautiful and the ugly. It's in that light that we grow. It's where masks fall away and the heart learns the power of being clean. Truth taught me that love without courage is illusion, that forgiveness without honesty is theater, and that those who run from the truth once will keep running forever. I don't want to run anymore. I want to face it, because facing is the first step toward healing. Today I understand that my purpose was never to be liked. It was to be real. The truth I carry isn't a weapon, it's a tool. I use it to build bridges, not walls. But to those still trapped in their own illusions, even a bridge can look like a threat. And that's okay. One day, when they're ready, they'll cross it. I speak because I believe in the power of words. Words spoken with faith, intention, and love can transform. They can heal wounds that time alone cannot. They can open paths where there was once only silence. True words are the breath that gives life meaning again. Some people tell me I should be softer, that life's already hard enough for so much truth. But I believe it's exactly because life is hard that truth must be spoken. It's the bitter medicine that saves you, and what heals doesn't always taste good. Telling the truth is also an act of faith. Faith that even if it hurts now, it will bloom into understanding. Faith that what divides today can unite tomorrow. Faith that pain has purpose, because everything born from truth eventually returns as peace. I've seen what lies do. I've seen families collapse, marriages crumble, friendships turn to dust, all because someone chose silence over honesty. That's why I made myself a promise. Never again will I stay quiet to keep up appearances. I'd rather be remembered for courage than convenience. Yes, honesty can be lonely, but in that solitude, you find out who you really are. I've learned there's no greater reward than looking in the mirror and feeling proud of the reflection, because the worst kind of prison is pretending to be someone you're not. Now I know my truth isn't arrogance, it's legacy. It's what I leave behind for my daughter, even if she doesn't understand it yet. One day, when she has her own daughter, she'll feel both the weight and the relief of saying what needs to be said. She'll see that my firmness was always love. Real love doesn't say what the other wants to hear. It says what the other needs to understand. The tone may be sharp, but the intention is pure. And that kind of love never fades, because it's built on truth, not illusion. If you understand that kind of love, write in the comments, "Truth sets you free." I want to see who still believes that love also means saying what hurts, that mature love doesn't run from hard conversations. Telling the truth is letting light in. And when the light enters, it reveals everything: the wounds, the flaws, the mistakes, and the possibilities. It shows how much still needs healing. And in that space between pain and clarity, the greatest transformations are born. An honest word is like a key. It opens doors that have been locked for years, and once you taste freedom, you never go back to living in chains. I don't want walls anymore. I want bridges. I don't want silence. I want dialogue. I don't want to wound while pretending to love. I want to love by speaking the truth. I still believe that sincerity is the purest form of respect, because when I speak, I acknowledge the other person as someone capable of hearing. And even if they don't want to listen, the seed has already been planted. One day, it'll bloom, even in the driest soil. Truth is a gift that sometimes comes wrapped in pain. But when the pain passes, what remains is lightness. The lightness of knowing there's nothing hidden, nothing fake, nothing weighing you down. It's a lightness only felt by those who've had the courage to strip away their lies. I've learned that truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. It speaks in calm tones, in a steady gaze, in the quiet confidence of someone who knows their worth. And maybe that's why people confuse firmness with arrogance. But those who've lived under the weight of silence know speaking is relief. That's why I keep speaking. Because every true word that leaves my lips carries a piece of the woman who survived, the woman who was taught to stay quiet but chose to become a voice, the woman who learned that the most beautiful kind of love is the one brave enough to be honest. And I know there are people listening right now, feeling that same knot in their throat I once felt, trying to find the strength to say what needs to be said. Breathe. Courage begins with a single breath, and it's with that breath that truth is born. One day, she came back. I wasn't expecting it anymore. I had learned to live with silence, with absence, with that kind of longing that doesn't hurt. It just weighs. But that day, the sound of the doorbell broke an entire cycle of waiting. I opened the door, and there she was, standing still, her eyes the same, but her face changed. Time had left marks on her skin and somehow erased the pride that once stood between us. We looked at each other for a few seconds that felt like a lifetime. She took a deep breath and said, "Mom, thank you for never giving up on being who you are." Those words pierced through me like a prayer, like God was giving me back the breath her silence had stolen. She stepped inside slowly, like someone walking through sacred ground filled with memories. The house was the same, but the air felt different. There was a peace that only comes when forgiveness starts to grow roots. I didn't say a word. Sometimes love speaks best through silence. She looked around, studying every detail like she was revisiting her own history. She sat at the table where we'd argued so many times, and there, without needing many words, time began stitching back together what distance had torn apart. She started to talk, not quickly, but honestly. She said she needed distance to understand, that my words had felt harsh back then, but they were exactly what she needed to hear. She said she finally saw in me a woman who had always been a mirror, even when reflection hurt. And now she understood the love inside not staying silent. As she spoke, I felt my heart settling, like each word she said erased a little bit of the pain that had been left behind. She told me that life had taught her everything I'd tried to say, that the world had shown her in practice what I already knew in my soul. Silence destroys more than any truth ever could, that those who keep quiet to be loved eventually lose themselves, and that no matter how hard she tried to ignore me, she always heard my voice in her mind, steady, unshaken, saying, "You may not like what I'm about to say, but I have to say it anyway." That's when I realized time isn't the enemy, it's the teacher. It teaches patiently what love tries to teach in a hurry. And at that moment, I saw the woman my daughter had become. She spoke with the same strength that once irritated me, with the same boldness that once hurt me, but now that strength was clarity. She finally understood that love and truth are the same thing, just spoken in different tones. I wanted to say so much, but the words stayed in my throat. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't come in speeches, it comes through a look, and her eyes told me everything, that the pride was gone, that the love remained, that the bond had been repaired. That's when I realized that what I once called separation was really time preparing us for this moment. She held my hands and said she finally understood what I meant when I talked about courage. She said she'd had to choose between being accepted and being authentic. And for a while, she chose the comfort of acceptance. But one day, she got tired. She said she remembered me, the woman she once said embarrassed her, but now called her example. In that instant, I felt the weight of the past dissolve, the guilt, the fear, the sadness. Everything turned into gratitude. She told me about her own pain, her own silences, the times she swallowed words just to keep someone close. And there, I saw the story repeating, but this time with a different ending. She too had learned that the price of silence is too high, that love demanding quiet isn't love at all, it's control. And as I listened, I realized the cycle was finally breaking. I held her close, and for the first time in a long while, there was nothing between us. No resentment, no misunderstanding, no open wounds, just two women who survived the weight of their own truths and could finally breathe in peace. Her hug was warm, firm, full of both regret and relief. And I, who once thought I'd never feel that again, understood that love always finds its way back. She looked at me and said, "Mom, I used to think you were harsh, but you were just being honest." I smiled, because that was the sentence I had waited my whole life to hear. I told her that speaking truth was never about being right. It was about loving with honesty. That love pretending not to hurt isn't love. It's anesthesia. And anesthesia stops the pain, but it also stops the healing. She nodded, her eyes shining. We talked for hours. We spoke of the past without bitterness, remembered the pain with respect. There were long pauses, but now they were peaceful, not fearful. And as she talked, I saw myself in her, in the way she held her cup, in her tone, in her gestures. It was like looking at a younger, freer, more self-aware version of me. At one point, she asked if I regretted what I said that day. I told her no. I told her truth is like a seed. Sometimes it takes time to sprout, but when it does, it changes everything. And if I'd stayed silent, she might still be trapped in the same chains that once held me. She hugged me again and whispered, "I get it now, Mom. You just wanted to set me free." She cried. So did I. But it was a light kind of crying, cleansing, gentle, the kind that comes when pain finally finds its purpose. That hug felt like closing a wound years in the making, and deep down, I knew nothing had been in vain. Every word spoken, every silence endured, every distance lived, all of it was part of the path that led us here. I told her that telling the truth is an act of faith, because you don't always see the result. Sometimes truth looks like destruction when it's actually making space for something new to grow. And that's what happened with us. What looked like the end was really just the beginning. She told me she now speaks her mind, that she's learned to stand tall, to set boundaries, to stop apologizing for existing. She said she still feels fear, but she's learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward with it. And when she said that, I knew she had finally understood everything I'd ever tried to teach. I didn't need to explain anymore. She had lived it, she had learned, and she had come back. As she spoke, I remembered all the nights I spent awake, praying that God would protect her, that love wouldn't get lost in pride. And now she was there, returning in gratitude everything I had once planted in pain. It felt like God whispering to me, "See, no true word is ever wasted." The sun began to set, and its golden light filled the room, casting warmth on her face. And I thought, this is what forgiveness looks like. A gentle light entering slowly, changing the air around. Love, when it matures, doesn't shout anymore. It understands, it embraces, it forgives. She held my hands and said that if she ever has a daughter, she wants to raise her the way I did, with truth. But with one difference, she'll tell her that being honest is beautiful, not shameful. I smiled. The cycle was broken, and the inheritance was now courage. She stayed until late. We talked about life, about pain, about what still hurts, but in a different way. There was no need to prove who was right anymore, only the desire to leave nothing unsaid. And as she spoke, I realized how much time matures love. If you know what this kind of reunion feels like, drop a comment. Love always finds its way back. I want to see who believes that truth can heal what pride once tore apart. Because when love is real, it never gets lost. It just waits for the right moment to come home. And that night, when she left, the house didn't feel empty anymore. She had left a piece of herself there, and taken a piece of me with her. It was as if our souls had finally made peace. I sat there, listening to the echo of the gate closing, my heart full of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. A quiet, steady peace that comes when love and truth finally recognize each other. One day, when my granddaughter calls me wise, I'll know it was worth being called difficult, because every woman who decides to be real is first judged, then understood, and only later remembered as strong. Time has that gift. It turns wounds into lessons, pain into legacy, and silence into voice. Today I understand that wisdom doesn't come from perfection. It's born from the scars we've learned to love. When I look back, I see that everything had a purpose. Every word spoken, every tear held back, every misunderstood gesture, all of it built the path that brought me here. And now I know, love isn't what avoids conflict, it's what survives it. To love is to keep going, even when the world tries to silence you. It's looking into the eyes of those who judge you and still choosing to be light. Truth, my old companion, has always been by my side. Sometimes it hurt me, sometimes it saved me, but it never left me. And today I realize it was never my enemy. It was my guardian. It was truth that kept me standing when everything tried to break me. And that's why I say, silence might feel safe, but it's truth that sets you free. It always has. I think about the women who came before me, the ones who stayed quiet out of fear, who smiled to hide their tears, who carried guilt like it was destiny. And I see that each of them lives in me. I am the result of their struggles, the echo of their lost voices, the cry they never got to let out. That's why I speak. Because when one woman speaks, every other woman breathes a little easier. Breaking the silence is the most beautiful legacy I can leave behind. It's not made of gold or possessions. It's made of freedom. Freedom to feel, to speak, to exist without apologizing for it. I want the next generation to understand that being truthful is the most sacred act there is. That truth doesn't destroy, it cleanses. And that love doesn't silence, it teaches. I've been called cold, harsh, too intense, but now I understand. All that was just the translation of strength from someone who refused to be molded again. Because the world fears a woman who isn't afraid of herself. And that's the woman I chose to be. The one who unsettles, but heals. Who wounds with words, but saves. With purpose. When I think about my granddaughter, I imagine her listening to my stories. Maybe not understanding everything, but feeling that there's power in truth, that there's love in firmness, that there's light even in the shadows of pain, and that it's worth being who you are, even when that costs you acceptance. One day, she'll look at me and understand that being called difficult was the price of freedom. Life moves in cycles, and I know that when mine comes to an end, what will remain is the voice. Because the voice of a truthful woman never dies. It echoes in her daughters, her granddaughters, and in all the women still learning to listen to themselves. And that's what keeps me going, knowing that the courage born in me will not die with me. So take a deep breath and carry this with you. Every truth that scares you is the same one that will heal you. Every silence that suffocates you is an invitation to speak. Every wound that hurts you is the beginning of your freedom. Don't fear your own voice. It's your soul trying to remember who you are. Silence was what we were taught. Truth is what we choose now. Let that be our legacy, to speak with courage, to love with honesty, and to live with purpose. Because in the end, what remains isn't what we hide, it's what we've had the courage to say. And if this story touched something in you, leave a comment. I am the end of silence. I want to see who carries this same fire, who understands that truth isn't a battle, it's an inheritance. Now, before you go, stay with me. The next video is already on your screen, and in it, I invite you to dive into another secret, another corner of the matriarch secrets. Because the truths may change, but the essence is the same. The courage to feel, to speak, and to live with soul. Click it and come with me.